This is our way back into base camp. This is returning from the Kumbh Ice Fall. So I've organized the presentation, even though the trip actually goes back and forth, but the presentation is not going back and forth because that will be very confusing. So you've done trek up to base camp, and then Kumbh Ice Fall, and then this is Camp 1. So this is the first camp on Everest. This is about 6,100 to 6,400 meters altitude, depending on where exactly your tents are pitched. It is not really a flat land as it's looking in the picture, because each of these things are actually very deep, and then they come back up again, and they come back up again. It's all over crevices, so you can't be like floating around or walking around. You have to always be on a fixed rope, so that, for your own safety. But it's a very, very, very scenic place. It's a beautiful place. Like, that's the sunset. So this picture is the same view. So during the day you can see all these mountains and all of these things, and in the same view all the mountains are suddenly gone, and it's a beautiful sunset at Camp 1. This is April 29 of last year. This is an avalanche. Do we have the video of it here? Yeah, this is the video. So as we were sitting there in the afternoon, I will tell you another story, but here is an avalanche just coming into base camp, Camp 1.
This one is almost approaching Camp 1.
And I'm thinking it's almost coming towards us.
Something from
Camp 1 में आ गया क्या? But fortunately for all of us, it missed us by about 50, 60 meters. It went to the left. And we could just carry on. That's Everest to the back. Left one to the back.
Coming from Muktsel.
So these avalanches, you have about, I think, between 4 and 8 avalanches every day, which you see. It's just that you have to be lucky enough to be not in the way of them. And there is a lot of science between choosing a path, which is called the avalanche safe paths, but that's only an estimate. That's only an expectation. There is obviously no guarantee of any kind. That's also partly the reason that a lot of climbing is happening at night. Because at night it's very stable, it's colder. Avalanches are obviously triggered by some bit of, the sun melting the snow and something's getting loose. So at night is much more stable. Typically avalanches are an afternoon phenomenon. But as we saw in 2014, it was 6 o'clock in the morning. And that was in the middle of the Kumbh Ice Fall, which you saw how the ice fall is. So if an avalanche is coming into that zone and you are on that, there is obviously nothing that you can do. 16 people died that year because of that. This is just the views from Camp 1. This is towards the higher side of Everest. You can see people on the left, on the right side, little specks of, the black specks are all human beings. This is a sort of a wider shot of Camp 1. This is me drying my shoes and myself. Afternoon in Camp 1. This is just before we took that video of the avalanche, actually. It's an afternoon at Camp 1. These are just passages between Camp 1 and Camp 2. As you can see, it's all crevasses, snow bridges, and it's a lot of ice climbing, and it's just gorgeous, but you always are aware at the back of your mind that you are not safe. There's no such thing as being safe. Once you are beyond base camp, there's no idea of safety. It's a completely transformed idea of what is safe. And that, I think, has a lot of parallels in life with your attitude, like what you consider to be within comfort zone, what is safe, unsafe, risk, not risk. So there has to be a belief that no matter what happens, we'll deal with it. We can handle it. And I think that's a big lesson for me. Personally, it transforms me as a person. And I do every year adventure trips, not only for the natural beauty and the photography, but I think it just recharges me as an individual. This is a very interesting video too, also, gives an idea of what it is. So this one is not working. Maybe yeah, it is. So this is like an example of how sometimes the path is barely, 20 centimeters. You can just put 1 foot at a time, And there is vertical drops on both sides. And obviously you are roped up. So in general, nothing should go wrong, but even if it does, unless you are very, very unlucky, you should probably be just dangling with a rope and not really falling off the mountain yet. But still, people do fall off every year. Few deaths are. There is a whole statistics about, 10% of the deaths on Everest are because of falling off.
And that's why you choose to use your camera to make a video.
Yes. Not the most sane of ideas, but again, as you said, I am friend with risk. That's a nice evening shot of Everest from Camp 1. To the left, the towering Black Mountain is the face of Everest, the west face. There is so much wind that even snow and ice cannot stay. Because sometimes it's sort of a unexpected thing that a whole face of Everest is without snow. That's mostly because of wind. The winds are really, really strong. And when the weather forecasts are being looked upon, and when you are deciding when you can go actually the summit accessibility, the wind speeds are a big part of it. Anything beyond 30-35 miles an hour is considered to be a no-go. So temperature is no problem, snowing and all of that is no problem, but the wind speed is a big deal. This is Camp 2, 6,500 to 6,700 meters. You are sort of getting closer to your mission. Another 4 or 5 days typically away, but this is one of our rotation trips. Just Camp 2, that's our camp. To the right, the big tents are the dining and the kitchen tents. The small tents are our sleeping tents. Typically temperatures between -25 and -35 once the sun is out, but during the sun it's nice and warm. Especially inside the tent is really warm during the summer when it's sunny outside. But the moment the sun goes, it's like it transforms within 5 minutes. These are some visuals of Camp 2, the sunset at Camp 2. This one here, you will see a little line of people to the right, the little black line going up. People. This is a picture from a distance. This is called the Lhotse face. It's actually a very steep vertical face, and Camp 3 is somewhere in the middle of that slope. This is a shot from a distance, and then you will see more close up. This is Camp 3 actually. So Camp 2 is where I marked Camp 2 there, that little black spot on the next to the mountain. Camp 2 is one of the safest camps on Everest because it is it's sort of away from this avalanche. Even if avalanches come in, they kind of die down before they really hit Camp 2. And Camp 3 is the exact opposite of what Camp 2 is in terms of safety, because it's right on that slope. The tents are put up by just removing some snow and making some flat ground somehow. And there is you are not supposed to be moving. Even to go to the toilet, you should be on the fixed rope. Always. And by the time we are sleeping here, we are using oxygen already. This is above 500-600 meters already. So this is Camp 3. I've given these titles in the book, and obviously there is a lot more detail. This is a path towards Camp 3. You see in this picture the vertical face, Lhotse face, and you see people right at the bottom there. You can see how it is going, and it is really, by the time you really reach Camp 3, it looks like it's there, but it takes about 8 hours from Camp 2 to get to Camp 3. These are just some images of the climb between 2 and 3. Yeah, that's the Lhotse face. So this is all ice face, and obviously you are using crampons and fixed ropes. But here you can see people going right up to the back. On the flat ground also there are people right up to the back. That gives you a little sense of scale of the place. Camp 3, I've tried to mark with arrows where some climbers are. And that's Camp 2 up there. This is images of Camp 3 looking upwards. Here you are typically staying only for a few hours. You don't want to be hanging out at Camp 3. It's right on the slope of the mountain. It's a very steep and a very dangerous place. If there is an avalanche or something here, there is absolutely no room for anything else. So typically in the expeditions, you reach here in the afternoon, and the same night you carry on towards Camp 4. Camp 4 is a relatively safe, except the altitude and wind, but it's a safer sort of piece of land in terms of being hidden from avalanches and stuff like that. But this is a very, very dicey spot. That's a night shot of Camp 3 and the headlamps of the people coming into the Western Cwm. So this whole flat part is called the Western Cwm on the mountain. And I like to do my photography, so even though it's cold and windy and dangerous and whatever else, but you still want to take a few pictures. This is the part from Camp 3 towards Camp 4. You see people, on the left is Everest. This part here, the rock here is called the yellow band on the Everest. The yellow band is a part of exposed rock around 8,000 meters high. And this is a very tricky patch because you have crampons on your boots, and in the ice they help, but on the rock they are a problem. They don't let you sort of take a grip, but you can't be taking them off and on. So you just have to sort of hold yourself with the rope and hope that you will not fly off the whole thing, but you have to kind of cross it. Typically you can't take more than 3 to 5 steps at a time. If you are very strong, maybe 5 steps. This is getting to the final ridge of Camp 4. The arrow there shows a human being, although you can almost not see it. Can you see the arrow? Here. This part here, and what I missed sharing with you earlier during the Khumbu Icefall part, on the personal side, one of the nights that we were climbing this the first time actually. So my team was ahead and I was following up with my Sherpa, and all of a sudden the whole of my left leg went through the floor. So all of a sudden I'm on the floor and this whole left leg is down through the ice into water. So there's water flowing under it. And then I have this whole mountain boot and the whole thing is completely soaked. So we've left base camp around 1:30 in the morning and we've been climbing about 2.5, 3 hours. And you go in. Fortunately, not both my feet went through at the same time, so I was still on the floor. People helped me out. But there was a call to take because then you can't go ahead anymore because obviously it's -30 and you got your foot completely soaked and it will become ice pretty soon, and that will be the onset of frostbite. So I actually returned alone from that spot back to base camp to use the sun the next day to dry my stuff, and then went back again the next morning. And here when we were going right around this spot, I don't know if their picture is here or their picture is not here. So right around this spot, what had happened with me was that my oxygen suddenly ran out. So I didn't realize. And my Sherpa, it was close to Camp 4, and then he said that, he was also tired and he wanted to go and set up, thinking you can come up by yourself. I said, yeah, that should be okay. And he left, and after 10 minutes, I am thinking like, I can't breathe anymore. I'm finding it much more difficult to walk. And then I saw my pressure gauge, and there is no oxygen in my tank. So the Sherpa is gone, and there is no oxygen in the tank, and we're still about 45 minutes away from camp. So then I was trying to walk, and then there were other mountaineers who said that you should just wait, you should not try to walk here because let somebody come back with help because you will just get completely exhausted if you try to do this. The point I'm making is that there are these things which will happen, and they happen to everybody. In life also they happen, in work, everywhere this happens. And this is one of the lessons which we'll talk about is that, and I worded the lesson as saying that expecting to deal with the unexpected is a lesson. That we cannot plan for every eventuality. You may be as prepared as you can be, but that does not mean that something new can never be sprung up. So expecting to deal with something unexpected is something which helps me or anybody else to know, you may not know exactly what can go wrong, regardless of what goes wrong, but if you are in your mind that, okay, something can go wrong and I'm always prepared or expecting to deal with something, it first of all helps me to not be completely off balance. You're not panicking because you are already prepared that something can go wrong and something unexpected will happen. And when that happens to me, I would say, okay, this is the one now, so we have got to deal with it. And there is not. The first thing is about how you attack the problem back and how you will not be completely cowed down. And this is a bunch of different things happen on expedition and everybody goes through it. Some people deal with it, some people don't deal with it. The first time people go over Khumbu Icefall, about 20% of the people go back. So they've come for Everest, they've spent the $50,000, $60,000. They prepared for a whole year. One meeting with the Khumbu Icefall, up 10 hours and back, we're going home. So it is not so much about the bravado and your strength and what you want to do, and obviously it's nothing to do with money. But it is about being flexible and being sort of anticipating that some things can go wrong, and that's okay. If you are there, if you can just sort of face it, it'll be fine. This is Camp 4, living it up in the death zone. So Camp 4, 8,000 meters and above, is officially classified as the death zone on Everest. It is a part where your body is actually physically dying. Your cells are dying. You are on oxygen, but that's not something which will keep you, you can't be there for 1 month on oxygen. So it's called the death zone, 8,000 meters. This is a picture which I've taken on my way back from the summit. It's a beautiful shot, very rare shot. All the little tents you can see is Camp 4, so it's in between the shoulders. It's also called the South Col. The Col is a high pass connecting the two peaks. So the mountain on that side is called Lhotse. Lhotse is the 4th highest, I think, in the world, 8,600 meters. Some expeditions also go to Lhotse from here. And this is the whole setting of Camp 4 you can see. And between these two mountains, I think it is probably the windiest place on the planet that I have spent some time in. And I believe you may have traveled to very, very strange places. What happened with us, again in the sequence of expecting to deal with the unexpected, when we got to Camp 4 from Camp 3, that picture, that was earlier on the 20th of May. And typically what happens is that when you reach Camp 4, again you reach during the afternoon, you take a rest for some hours, and then at night you go for the summit. You can't be hanging out here in this area. You are in the death zone, you need to get out of here quickly. So we got there around midday and then we rested, but in the evening was so stormy, it was so windy, that we had to take a call of not climbing that night. So we took a call to spend a whole extra night at Camp 4. We just went back into our tents, put on our oxygen. We had prepared in advance by taking some extra cylinders of oxygen. We had 2 extra cylinders per person, sort of, for some accident or something. So that was helpful. But we spent an extra 24 hours on Camp 4 at 8,000 meters. Slept, you can't really sleep, but you sort of lie down inactive inside your sleeping bag. The sleeping bags are rated for minus 40 degrees. And you're wearing all your gear with your Himalayan suit and all your warm things, and then you still are inside a nylon tent. Obviously, there is no heating or any of those things. So this is Camp 4 in general. This is the view of it. This is the view of the path coming over. So this is the Western Cwm. From Camp 4, as you can see, you're above most of the mountains in the world. Camp 4 is already 8,000 meters high. And these are some gorgeous pictures that I was able to get. So this is where I said, I ran out of my oxygen and my Sherpa had already moved. And climbing without, so this is where I'm sitting and I'm waiting for this. So fortunately another Sherpa came by who knew me, and then he went to the Camp 4, he told the other guys, I waited here, they ran back with another cylinder, they changed my cylinder, and I could just go back to Camp 4. Probably sitting at 45 minutes, maybe. This is a close-up of Camp 4. So you saw that image. This image from a distance, from the top. And then this is sort of inside the village, Camp 4. Camp 4 is actually, in terms of just, how dirty the camps are, etc., etc. Camp 4 is the only camp I would say is genuinely littered with stuff. You can see tents and shoes and sweaters and whatever. So, but the fact is that when you are actually there, it is so hard to move that even a small toothpaste tube of the ones that you kind of get in the airlines, and I saved some of them and I was carrying those. The things you can have a small one and then sort of put it back in your pocket. It is very, very difficult. On the way back, my Sherpa was ill and he was carrying a small bag for me, maybe about 1 kilo. And he said, I can't carry it, so I said, okay, I'll take it from you. And I took it back from him and I walked maybe 30 minutes. I've already done the summit, I'm kind of okay, I'm internally very happy and so on. 30 minutes later, I said, we need to stop. We went through everything in the bag and every single thing that I did not need then and there. Ladies and gentlemen, I am guilty of the fact that there was a t-shirt, there was maybe socks or stuff like that. I literally had no choice but to just leave it there. I was not able to move. Maybe I left 750 grams of my stuff, nothing which would never perish or something, but I am just explaining to you that making commentary on other people's situations, sitting in the comfort of our living rooms, is a totally different situation. And the same story with what people say about dying on Everest. I mean, everybody who's going to the summit, I obviously don't have pictures, but out of respect, you don't take pictures of dead bodies out there. But you can, go to YouTube and just, if you like, just say dead bodies on Everest, and you will see how many there are. There is a very interesting video called The Dark Side of Everest. Maybe 20-something minutes. So every day before, on the preparation side, I used to be watching all of these videos at night nearly every day for months. So you're kind of very prepared to see what it is. And I am sharing this with you, and I'll share the story when the spot comes, so let me just save the story for a few more minutes. So this is Camp 4, and yes, people do leave things there. There are tents, there are shoes, there are other kinds of things out there, but really it is a place you are in the death zone, you really just want to survive. And there are some compromises that happen because of that situation, but there are, treatment, because obviously the Sherpas can do a lot better than us, but they have so many other things. They have the oxygen cylinders. All the empty cylinders have to be taken back. So fortunately, there is not that kind of stuff lying there, but still it is a little messy, as you can see in the camp. This is a gorgeous sunset from Camp 4. You are that's your last sunset at 8,000 meters. By the next sunset, hopefully you've already been to the top of the world. So that is the last piece of Everest. You see from Camp 4, that's the view. The arrow shows a human being. Here, I know you can't see much, but gives you a sense of scale. It is a part of our lessons, and speak about it later, but let me share it with you right now because we have this picture. That lesson for me was that scale should not scare you or scare us. The scale of our plans, ambitions, ideas is not something which should be scaring us. And Everest is a mountain that you start looking at Everest. The first time you see it is somewhere near that village, Namche Bazaar, which I said, which is the final sort of village where you can shop and buy some things. That is about 40 days before you will actually climb it. And you see that little tip at somewhere in the horizon, a little small pyramid. And day after day after day, you keep getting closer and closer and closer, and it becomes more and more massive. You obviously know in advance that you are dealing with the Everest. It's the highest, the death ratios, the books, the stories, the news, all of that is already digested or not. Then finally, you are in this spot, Camp 4, the last night, and it is still massive. This is the last view which you say, okay, now this is the part where I have to go and come back. Till now, you were only going and camping somewhere. So you go from Camp 2 to Camp 3, then you camp there. You go Camp 3 to Camp 4, then you stay there. But here, all of that is done. You're in Camp 4, that's your final job. You have to go up and come back. No resting, no eating, no sleeping, no nothing. Either you are back or you're not. So the scale of our ambitions or our plans should not be scaring us. It should be something, it's a very important thing for me, that if the scale is not going to scare us and we can deal with the unexpected and we are prepared and passionate, and there are two more things that I'll add, a lot of things in business and life can be achieved. And I know you guys are building an organization, and I'm sure you have your own Everest in mind. And I would say that there is nothing as such as scary. Scale at least should not be a question of scary. Scared. This is actually a picture from near the summit. This is my final chapter in the book. It's called Life on Borrowed Time. This is a picture from about 8,850 meters. You know, almost there, the moment when the dream of Everest is accomplished, you say your prayers, thank yous, and take a few photos. And then within 15 to 20 minutes, it's time to start the return journey to the Camp 4. It took me about 13 hours to reach the top from C4 and about 11 hours to get back. I was slowed down much more on my way back because of people and had to monitor my oxygen level. I'll speak about that a little bit later. So this is just a picture of the last. As you can see at the back, the whole valley. I mean, the views are gorgeous. They are to die for, but you actually can die also. So it's not only to die for, people do. This is the night part of the climb. From Camp 4, climbing up from the balcony. This is where the first, so there are 3 cylinders of oxygen that each member has from Camp 4 to up and back. The first cylinder is changed somewhere here. This next cylinder should reach up to the summit and somewhere up to halfway to the back, and then the last cylinder. Now that is where the whole danger of this traffic jam and any other kind of slowdown, because you may be slow, but the oxygen has to keep flowing. And to me, when I connect this back to life and business, oxygen is like time. Whether we are moving, not moving, safe, unsafe, whatever we are thinking, not thinking, time is not going to be stopping. And on Everest, oxygen is keep on going. You need that thing, you can monitor it a little bit, but it's going. So if you're taking too long or you're immobilized or somebody else is, at some point, the last thing you want is to be out of oxygen. And there's nothing you can do. There's no more oxygen. There is no more help. No matter how much money you paid, no matter which agency, which Sherpa, who you are, there are 3 cylinders of oxygen for everyone. And either you make it or you don't. And so many parallels in life. There is time. Everyone has the 24 hours or the 6 months or the 1 year or whatever. And if we are not moving ahead, the time is still running. And at some point it will run out. But if you see these parallels, you see within 4 or 5 days, they give you a lot of very first-hand real life lessons about what it means to not move while consuming your resources. These are just some shots at night time. You see how vertical it is. You see the last lights at the bottom of the slope and the final piece. So there are a lot of places which are straight vertical up. And you have to be, obviously on your rope and your arms and all those kinds of equipment that you have. This is when it starts to light up a little bit, still moonlight, daylight kind of mixed, but you can still see lamps and images from the climb itself. And obviously these pictures are very difficult to take because every time you have to take a picture, you have to take your gloves off. All those e-gloves and e-tips, etc., don't work there. So I had my phone next to my body inside to just keep it warm. And every time I needed to take a picture, I will have to stop, take out the glove, take out the phone, quickly point, not really plan a shot, but within 15 seconds, everything should be done. You should be back with your glove within 15 seconds. You don't want to be exposed. It's a very, very dangerous thing to do. But anyway, I did it. And I'm standing right here, so it should be okay. It's a beautiful, beautiful. So, the views start showing up, and this is a few hours from the summit, and then you begin to feel excited about how your goal is getting very, very real now. But in this situation, you know it very well that anything can happen at any time. This is just when the light is showing up during the day. That small star that I put on the top, that's Makalu. Mountain is about 8,500 meters high. One of the, 8,100. It's one of the easier 8,000 meter peaks. It is done by many as a pre-expedition to Everest. but these are just some beautiful views out there. This is at the south summit, a place where you see the glacier is down below about 10,000 feet. So this is the last ridge, 6,000 feet into Nepal or 10,000 feet into China. And this is pretty much, where you are finally really struggling with every single step. And you know that you have to still go back. I called it the most difficult to see sunrise in the world. So nearly from the top of the world, beautiful sunrise. We were blessed with good weather, at least till we got to the summit. Weather started changing while we were right there. Some of my pictures that I see on the left side, it is all clouds coming up, pretty much. So I got lucky that I got the pictures before them. So this is the picture straight up from the south summit. And these are some excerpts from what I shared earlier on social media, and I'm saying it does not matter if you're totally exhausted, dehydrated, freezing, hypoxic, hungry, or anything worse. You must remain super alert and top performance mode, or you will pay, and you will pay with your life. That's the deal, either you take it or leave it. That's what you sign up for when you sign up for a shot at placing foot on the top of this world. This whole ridge is pretty much the last hurdle patch before you reach the summit. This part here, you can almost not see it. This is the Hillary step. I don't know if you're familiar with this term. There is this whole idea of Hillary step on the mountain is the last difficult patch before you actually, there is sort of a smooth walk to the summit. You can see there are a lot of people there. It's a black patch, you can't see much, but there were a traffic situation right there because it's very slow. It's an overhanging rock and it's one rope. People are going both ways. So some people who've done the summit before you are also going down in the same path and you're trying to go up. And there is a mountain on one side and 6,000 feet on the other side, and it's one rope. So it's quite a maneuver out there to actually sort of, go past people in either direction. These are some views from near the top. So this is the final walk to the summit. That's the summit at the end. And you know that now most of it can be considered as certain. This would be very, very tragic if somebody still did not make it after this. But there are people who have gone through this. I will share with you a personal story on the way back. This is from the summit. The last people are coming in. And you can see the clouds are coming in from the left already. You can't see anything on the left now after this. So that's the Everest summit. That's it. Once you finally reach this dream, all lessons learned, all risks taken, all effort made, all cost paid, this is it. Can be a little underwhelming, but when you are out there, and again I would draw a parallel here with our work lives, that there is no such thing. I mean, once you are there, then is it really done? Because then you, in case of Everest, you don't see a higher summit, but in most other cases you do. Here, the trouble with Everest is that everybody knows that most of the accidents are on the way back. And getting to the top is less than half the job done. Even though your mission is accomplished and you are to some extent happy, but as somebody has said, getting to the top is optional, but getting back is mandatory. So this is the final piece of the summit picture itself. I think this is my Sherpa and me. This is me with all the ice all over me. I think there was a video. Is this the video? Yeah, that's the summit videos, 15 seconds. That's the 360-degree view from the top of the world. You can see on the left there is already cloud going up, So it was easy for you to see it. Let's play it one more time. Here is what and this is me with my company logos and things. But this is what I share with all genuinity, that my goal was to prove to myself what ordinary people like me can do with preparation plus passion. I'm no fitness freak or sportsman, etc. A genuinely ordinary chap and a mountain lover. I made it So that means really that most people can do it. Go for your Everest, my friends, whatever that happens to be, there ain't no mountain too high that you cannot do. So on this way, this is the part of the way back, as you can see the weather is going bad. The story that I was wanting to talk about was this people dying on Everest. So when you are here, preparing, talking, there is a lot of chat, the base camp, you're there for 40 days, what do you think you're talking about? It is just Everest stories, all kinds of good, bad, ugly, and a little bit of politics and other fun, of course, but mostly it's Everest. And everybody in their minds are thinking that, if somebody is dying, I cannot just leave them and go on. How can I ever do that? That's impossible. So on my way back from the summit, on that ridge where I said the last part was, there is this girl, another Indian girl from another camp, a young girl, I knew her from base camp. And I am going and suddenly I hear, Aditya sir. Who is here calling me by my name? And so I see this girl is there and she is on the ridge. So I said, yeah, like what happened? She was crying. So she said, I'm so and so, and because she moved her oxygen mask, I could recognize her. And she said that my Sherpa is left and I have no more oxygen. And this is about 30 minutes under the summit. And I am like, oh my God. So I asked my Sherpa to help her, and said, okay, I'll walk you, why don't you help her? But somehow this girl has really collapsed mentally. She, like every 5 steps, she just sort of going down to the floor, blocking other people, crying, and all kinds of things are happening. And I'm in my mind thinking that this is not going to happen. And the story that I'm sharing with you here is that after 15-20 minutes of trying to help her, which was my first reaction, very soon you realize that if you try to keep doing this, you will probably not make it yourself. So this is a person who I know already. She's not even a complete stranger. And I am really uncertain whether she'll make it. But now I have to make a decision to what am I supposed to do. But the fact is that, I thought to myself that no matter what I do, there is nothing as such that I can do. I have nothing to spare. I am on my last cylinder of oxygen. I have one Sherpa. I've been walking 15-16 hours myself. I don't know how much more time it will take me to get back, or if I will. And eventually, I have to sort of say some words of courage, etc. to her and say, why don't you keep on going? Maybe somebody will help you, wait for your team. I said, like, where are your teammates? They are ahead. So, okay, let them come back. And I'm sure they'll do something for you because that's your team. They must be prepared for something. But what I'm saying to you is that I actually experienced this myself where I had to move on, feeling very uncertain whether this woman will make it or not. And when I got back to base camp, not base camp, but like the camp that name, there was this thing that one Indian woman has died. And I'm going in my mind, oh my God, it must be the same. Because I was so uncertain about her. However, it turned out that that lady actually made it back. So somebody else died. But this girl made it and she lost a few fingers and things. But otherwise, the reason I'm sharing this story is that this whole thing about morals and ideas, and principles, etc., we all have principles. But there are real life situations where there is only so much that we can do. And the other lady who died also was from the same camp, incidentally, slightly elderly lady. And she basically died, and a lot of people die because of that on Everest, is that when you don't turn around at the right time. So every time your Sherpas, your guides, your senior will tell you that, look, the mountain is here to stay, you have to take a call. If you can't do it, you can't do it. But the fact is that you are so committed to the whole idea of the summit. There is a term for it on Everest called summit fever. That you don't want to turn around. You just feel like getting exhausted and feeling like you can't do it anymore is an everyday affair. So you don't know what time to take that call. But fact of the matter is that while it is so important to be very firm in your mind and determined and every positive thing that you can be, you have to be also very, very conscious about when is the right time to cut your losses and turn around. A lot of people die on Everest because of not turning around at the right time. And their guides, and they say that if she had turned around just 2 hours sooner, she would have made it back. This woman kept going, and just under the south summit, the other part from where you see that ridge, she just collapsed. And then they couldn't do anything about it. It was finished. So cutting the losses and sort of taking that call, and my personal story of someone I know and I am feeling that she might not make it, and I tried to help her a bit, but there was nothing that I could do. You had to move on. This is how steep and vertical. This is a steep vertical shot on the way back. So these people are backed up, and I was just, this is my shoe, and waiting there. I didn't want to be right next to the whole queue, but it just gives you a sense of what it is, And this is now I'm talking back. So now that the overall story is kind of done, you've seen the summit. I compressed the way back. I didn't want to keep on talking about a lot of different pictures. We already are done more than an hour. So that's what I call my brain tattoos, to take away lessons from Everest. Again, as I said, nothing magical, but the first one obviously is, preparation plus passion is equal to performance. I am thinking this is the most basic and the most obvious thing, but a lot of times I have seen, including within myself, employees, colleagues, clients, children, sometimes one of the two is missing. And you nearly never make it, if either passion or performance is missing. Everest, like most other mega missions, call for preparation on all fronts: mental, physical, technical. That's lesson number 1. Lesson number 2 is the one that I want to talk about now, is the power of focus. Again, nothing brand new, nothing that you never heard of or you never thought of. But, the examples of crossing the ladder, for instance, or those paths which is like 20 centimeters wide, there is only one trick, that you will not look anywhere else except where the foot has to go. Because if you look to the left or to the right, you just lose your balance. And the ladders are shaking like this because they're just barely stuck in there. So that power of focus, to the degree that you don't even see anything else, you don't see anything, just screen it out. If that's the degree of focus you have, I think it becomes very easy, because where you can put your foot is okay. If other stuff around that is not okay. So as long as I can be so sure about myself that I will not look at anything else, I will not be influenced by other stuff around it. To that degree, all other factors have to be missing, to look small, keeping tuned into the signal while cutting out the noise is the key factor. Scale should not scare you. I've already shared that idea about what I meant. Everest is not only the world's largest mountain, but also the subject of many books and films around tragedies that have struck during expeditions. You know that you're going into thin air, but eventually, if it is scary, you probably shouldn't be there. This is, again, the most critical, if there is one thing, this one and the one about, being prepared to deal with the unexpected. It is about one step at a time. The whole night when you are climbing to the top from Camp 4, it is one step and between 5 and 7 deep breaths. It's like, go 1, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And it's mostly kind of 45 degrees or higher. The whole night for 13 hours is that thing. And the whole expedition is basically that. I will have to stop thinking about how much is left, how much have I done. All of that has to be, at time and again, it has to be screened out. And one step at a time, if we are just about putting one step ahead of the other. It got me, friends, to the top of Everest. I think it can get anybody anywhere. But if we constantly, it's 13 more hours to go, it's so many more meters to go, yeah, it is, that's going to change. It's not going to change. There is this beautiful movie I saw recently on the plane again. A lot of you might, this is about lawyers, doing this. The Bridge of Spies. Have you seen it? This is about the Russian spy who's caught in America, and then he's being tried to. There is Tom Hanks is his lawyer. He has to save the Russian spy in America on a judicial proceeding. So he goes to him in jail, and this guy is always very, very cool. So he's giving all kinds of scary scenarios, and this guy is almost not affected. So Tom Hanks goes like, "You don't seem alarmed." So this guy is very cool. He just looks up and says, "Will it help?" So every time Tom Hanks is this American lawyer, getting very, that you are almost about to be killed. And this guy is almost never bothered. And every time he reacts like, "Okay, will this help?" Okay. After one light did go off. Will this help? So, the point I was making was with this whole one step at a time story is that it's a question of how perseverant can we be and all the time not calculating how much is accomplished, how much is left. At least out there it can be a very, because that's a lot of the people who turn around early in the expedition. Like as I said, first day on the Khumbu and 20% of the people say we're going back. It's a result of that whole extrapolating a problem that we had. So we had a hard day, we had a hard time dealing with the Khumbu, and then, we have to go over 6 more times, it's 35 more days, so on and so on. And I think one step at a time was a very important lesson for me. One simple answer for a lot of different problems, steep, dangerous, ladders, avalanches, whatever the hell it is just one step at a time. And then the last one, as I said, expecting to deal with the unexpected. Things happen, people, weather, equipment, teammates, so many things in Everest, but in our lives, the same story. So many things happen, like client, like in your case clients, in my case also clients. One of our large American clients, Pier 1 Airport, just declared bankruptcy 2 days ago. I have an exposure of a couple of million. So be it. I can deal with the Everest, I can deal with anything. These are a lot of media coverage, and surprisingly a lot of media coverage including GQ and FHM. This was all about, 50 years old guy, TV, every article was about 50-year-old guy, businessman, right? All unexpected things. But anyway, I don't think there was such a big deal. It's a question of one step at a time and preparing and performing. This is on the way back. My wife and my daughter, they had come back to receive me at Kathmandu from Delhi. So I'm right there at Kathmandu airport. That's how a certificate to climb the world looks like. At the top of the world. That's the official certificate you get from Nepal. I thought that would be a fun thing to share. Certificate of a mountaineering expedition. This is to certify that Mr. Aditya Gupta, resident of so-and-so, successfully climbed 8848 meters Sagarmatha, Mount Everest peak on 2019, 22nd of May as a member of the mission. So it's a very, like just a regular piece of paper. So that's my quote, as I said. Usually we think that brave people have no fear, but the truth is that they are just intimate with fear. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you so much for sharing this adventure. It's really quite something. And I guess there's no really any early retirement plans for you then?
No, not at all. What is retirement? I have already had my fun.
Well, we want to know what it looks like then.
I'm having all my fun. For me, it's always like I'll do whatever I need to do without getting retired.
We're running very late, so my suggestion is that we skip our coffee break, so that if you want to ask 2-3 questions to Mr. Gupta here,
yeah, if there's anything or comments or questions or ideas, or if you want to add to any of the lessons, because here we are to talk about what the Everest has been teaching us.
We'll have another half an hour after that to push through, so I'm sure you can survive for another half an hour.
Yes, sir.
I heard and read that the Sherpas left.
Yes, so that was a part, okay, so I'm glad you brought it up. That was another part, was the whole idea of the dealing with the unexpected story. So on my way back, where that jam was, where that verticals drop and I saw that there were photos of people waiting, that's where my Sherpa actually just took off. So the last